Welcome to my channel. If you love great stories, hit subscribe and give this video a like to join the journey.
They say some houses are born bad. That brick and timber, plaster, and paint can hold memories. Dark memories. The kind that never fade. Some people laugh at that. They say a house is just a house. But those people have never stepped inside the place where I lived. My name is Daniel Harrington, and this is the story of the house that ruined my life. It started on a gray October morning, the kind of day where even the air feels heavy, damp, pressing down on your chest like a weight you can't shake. I remember the way the mist curled across the road, clinging to the tires of my car as if the world itself didn't want me to arrive. And then there it was, Harrington House, a mansion older than memory, 3 stories high, tall, sharp roof lines like jagged teeth against the sky. Every window shutter broken, hanging loose, like the eyes of a corpse left too long in the sun. I killed the engine and just sat there in the driveway, gravel crackling beneath me, hands gripping the wheels so tightly that my knuckles turned white. This house was mine now, an inheritance from relatives I'd never known, bought cheap from an estate lawyer eager to wash his hands of it. I told myself it was a fresh start, a place to finally build a life. But even then, before I set a single foot across its threshold, I swear to you, I felt it, the weight of something unseen, watching. The front door groaned when I pushed it open. Not like wood, not like rust. It was the kind of groan a throat makes when someone is trying not to scream. The air inside was stale, heavy, almost wet, like the house had been holding its breath for decades, and now that I was inside, it was finally exhaling. I stepped into the foyer, boots thudding on warped floorboards. Every sound echoed back at me. Too loud, too sharp, like the house was repeating me. The wallpaper was peeling. Roses faded into brown stains, more like dried blood than flowers. The fireplace was cracked, blackened from a fire that looked centuries old. And in the corner of the living room stood a rocking chair, rocking, back and forth, even though no window was open, even though no draft stirred the curtains. I froze, every hair on my neck rising, and then, just as suddenly, it stopped, still, silent. I told myself it was my nerves, that old houses did strange things, but deep down I knew better. The first night was quiet. Too quiet. I lay in bed staring at the cracked ceiling, listening. But what struck me most was the absence of sound. No crickets, no owls, not even the distant hum of traffic. It was as though the world outside had forgotten this place existed. And yet, inside, the house remembered. I could hear it shifting, wood groaning in the walls, pipes rattling as if something was crawling through them. And once, just once, the sound of footsteps. Above me, slow, deliberate, but I was the only one there. By the third night, the dreams began. I was walking down a hallway, endless, stretching further than the house could possibly contain. The walls leaned inward, closer with every step, like they wanted to crush me. And at the end, a door, wide open, a blackness beyond so complete it swallowed the light around it. From that blackness came a whisper, not words, not yet, just a sound, low, insistent like breath curling against my ear. I woke drenched in sweat, but when I turned to the door of my bedroom, it was open, and I know I had locked it. The neighbors kept their distance. Old men on porches stopped talking when I walked by. Children crossed the street rather than come near the gate. Finally, one afternoon, I asked the grocer about it. She looked at me a long time, her face pale and serious. And all she said was, "Don't stay there after dark. Some houses don't like company." I laughed, pretended it didn't bother me. But that night, the whispers began. At first, I thought it was the wind, soft, subtle, a rustling through the walls. But then it grew sharper, closer. I sat up in bed, heart pounding. The sound was inside the room. And then, clear as day, a voice breathed my name. Daniel. I shot upright, fumbling for the lamp. The room was empty, utterly still. But I swear to you, I felt the warmth of breath against my ear. That was when I understood the house was not empty. It never had been, and I had just stepped into its mouth. Silence. That was the first thing I noticed about Harrington House. It wasn't the kind of silence you hear in the countryside, not the gentle stillness where you can still catch the rustle of leaves or the distant call of an owl. No, this was different. This silence was thick, heavy. It pressed against my ears like water filling them, as though the world itself had forgotten how to breathe. No bird circled the sky above the roof. No cricket sang in the grass. Not even the wind dared to touch the trees that surrounded the mansion. It was as if nature itself had drawn a circle around this place and refused to cross it. And yet, the house was not still. The house was alive. I could feel it in the way the floorboards groaned under my weight, not just with straining, but something beneath it, shifting, waiting. The walls whispered faint cracks, like joints popping. The air inside pulsed, expanding, contracting, like lungs drawing shallow, careful breaths. And sometimes, in the corner of my eye, I swore I saw the wallpaper move, not peeling, not shifting with the breeze. No, breathing. I stepped outside, desperate for proof I was imagining it. But the world beyond the house was no safer. The fields lay still, frozen under a dull, gray sky. The trees did not sway. The grass did not bend. And I realized it wasn't that the animals had fled. It was that they knew what I did not yet understand, knew what I had willingly walked into. Harrington House was not simply a home. It was a presence, a predator, and I was no guest. I was prey, and then I heard it, that long, groaning sigh from deep within the walls. Not the sigh of wood, not the sigh of time, but the sigh of something vast, something tired, something hungry, as though the house had just woken up. The house does not reveal itself all at once. No, it is patient. It waits. The first signs are never loud. They are never violent. They come like a soft knock at the edge of your mind, barely noticed, easily dismissed. But once you let them in, they never leave. It was late. The wind outside had died. The night was so still, it felt as though the world had stopped breathing. I sat in the living room, unpacking boxes, trying to pretend I wasn't afraid. And then I heard it, the rocking chair. At first, I thought I imagined it. But when I looked up, it was moving, slowly, back and forth, back and forth. The wood creaked under an invisible weight. The shadows bent with its motion, stretching across the floor like long, crooked fingers. I froze. My skin prickled, and yet I couldn't look away. The chair moved for a full minute, maybe longer, until it stopped, all at once, as though whoever sat in it had just stood up. I was alone, but the silence told me otherwise. Later that night, I locked every door, checked them twice. The sound of the bolt sliding home gave me comfort. It meant safety. It meant separation between me and whatever waited in the dark. But safety in that house was an illusion, because at 2:13 in the morning, the door creaked open. The sound was long, slow, a dragging hinge, stretching against the silence. I sat up in bed, staring at the shadow on the floor, the outline of the door wide open. I couldn't move. I couldn't breathe. I told myself it was the wind, but there was no wind. The night outside was dead, and the air inside was heavier than breath. Then came the whispers. At first, they were faint, like someone standing far away, speaking into water. A hum, a sigh, almost like the house itself was breathing words into the walls. I pressed my ear against the doorframe. The sound slid under the floorboards, slipped through the cracks in plaster. It was everywhere and nowhere. And then it called my name, clear, sharp, right at my ear. Daniel. I jumped back, heart slamming in my chest. The house was silent again. Utterly, painfully silent. But the damage was done. Because once a house whispers your name, it knows you, it owns you, and it will never let you go. The whispers did not stop after that night. They grew bolder. They grew closer. Every shadow stretched longer than it should. Every creak of the wood felt deliberate, and every silence was not empty, but watching. It was past midnight, the kind of hour where even the insects fall silent, where the stars themselves seem to retreat behind the clouds. I lay in bed, the blanket pulled to my chest, staring at the ceiling. The house was quiet, too quiet, and yet I knew I was not alone. I could feel it, not in the room, but underneath it, as though the floorboards were the thinnest skin stretched over something vast, something alive, breathing just below me. I tried to sleep. God, I tried. But then it happened. At first, it was only the pressure. Something resting against my ankle, gentle, light, almost like the brush of a hand. I told myself it was a blanket. I told myself it was nothing. But then it tightened. Fingers, cold, curling around me. I froze. My blood turned to ice. Every nerve screamed at me to move, to kick, to run, but my body would not obey. And then, slowly, whatever it was began to drag, just the smallest pull, as though testing, as though reminding me, you are not in control here. I bit down on my lip until I tasted iron. My breath came shallow, broken, and in the dark, I whispered the truth aloud. This house is a mouth, and I'm inside it. Night in Harrington House was worse than the day, because at night, the silence wasn't empty anymore. It was filled with things I couldn't explain, things I didn't want to explain. The first night, I woke to a sound, a faint, steady scrape. S-C-R-R-K, S-C-R-R-K, S-C-R-R-K. I froze, lying in bed, staring into the dark. At first, I thought it was rats. The house was old, after all, but then I realized where it was coming from. The basement door, a slow, clawing, scratching sound, like nails dragging across wood, not frantic, not animalistic, deliberate, as if whatever was down there knew I was listening. The second night, it was worse. I woke again, this time not the scratching, but the breathing, right outside my door. Heavy, uneven, the kind of breath someone takes when they're standing too close. Leaning in, listening. I didn't move. I didn't even blink. I just lay there, every nerve in my body screaming. And then, just as suddenly as it began, the breathing stopped. But I swear, I could still feel it, the warmth of it, lingering in the air. By the third night, I couldn't sleep at all. The house had grown restless. The silence that once pressed against my ears had fractured, and in its place came whispers. At first faint, too faint to make sense of, just fragments sliding through the walls, carried by no wind. But then they grew louder. My name, again and again. Low voices, curling through the plaster like smoke. Daniel, Daniel, always just out of reach. Never loud enough to confront, but always there. And worst of all, the whispers never came from the same place twice. One night, from the ceiling above my bed. The next, from beneath the floorboards. Sometimes from inside the walls themselves. As though the house wasn't just alive, but speaking. By the end of the week, I was broken. I hadn't slept. I hadn't eaten. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw shadows shifting at the edges of the room. And the basement door, it had changed. The scratches were deeper, longer, fresh with curling at the edges like something was desperate, so very desperate to get out. I tried to tell myself it was in my head, that old houses make noises, that silence plays tricks. But then one night, I felt it. Something touched me. I was lying in bed, staring into the dark, too scared to sleep. And then, soft, cold, fingers brushing against my ankle. Not quick, not a mistake. A caress. I bolted upright. heart hammering in my throat. But the room was empty. The air was still. I pressed my back to the headboard, gasping, whispering to myself in the dark. This house is a mouth, and I'm inside it. And in that moment, I swear I felt the walls shiver, as though the house had heard me and laughed. By the seventh night, I stopped pretending, stopped telling myself it was the wind, stopped telling myself the house was just settling. No, it wasn't the wind. It wasn't the wood. It was the house. The whispers had grown constant now, not fleeting, not faint, but constant, like dozens of mouths pressed against the walls, murmuring secrets I wasn't supposed to hear. Sometimes I thought I caught words, fragments, warnings, please. Other times, laughter, and the breathing outside my door no longer waited for nightfall. Now it came at dusk, as though the thing outside had grown bolder, hungrier. The basement door, it wasn't scratched anymore. It was carved, shapes jagged and sprawling, gouged deep into the wood. I didn't recognize them. They weren't letters. They weren't words. But when I stared too long, I swear I felt a move, like wounds that hadn't stopped bleeding. The house was changing. Shadows stretched longer than they should. Rooms seemed to breathe in when I entered and breathe out when I left. Even the air felt different, denser, as though I wasn't walking through air at all, but through lungs. And then, one night, I understood. I had been lying awake, staring at the ceiling, too afraid to sleep, too afraid to close my eyes. And then I heard it again, the soft scrape, the slow whisper, the breath. But this time, it wasn't just noise. It was rhythm, the scratch, the whisper, the breath. They weren't separate things. They were part of something larger. A single, steady pulse that filled every wall, every floorboard, every inch of Harrington House. And I realized I wasn't living in a haunted house. I wasn't surrounded by ghosts. I was inside something alive, something vast, something patient, something that had been waiting, not for centuries, not for decades. For me, the house is not haunted. The house is not cursed. The house is a predator, and I am inside its mouth. For nights, I told myself I could endure it. The scratching behind the basement door, the breathing outside my bedroom, the whispers in the walls. But the truth was crawling closer, closer than I ever imagined. Because on the last night, the house changed. I lay awake, my eyes locked on the ceiling, my body frozen beneath the sheets. The walls pulsed with sound, soft murmurs, like lips pressed against stone. But this time, the sound wasn't muffled. It wasn't distant. It was right next to me. I could feel the warmth of breath brushing against my skin. And then it spoke, not faint, not hidden, but clear. A voice, wet, heavy, and cold, pressed itself against my ear, and it said my name. Daniel. I jerked upright, heart slamming in my chest. The room was empty, the shadows still, the door locked. But I knew I hadn't imagined it, because the whisper hadn't come from the walls. It hadn't come from the floor. It had come from right beside me, as if the house itself had leaned down and breathed into my ear. The house doesn't just surround me. It knows me. It wants me. And tonight it spoke my name. Thanks for watching part 1. The story doesn't end here. Part 2 is on the way. Stay tuned. You don't want to miss it. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and hit the bell so you can never miss an update. See you in the next video.